Hi, everybody. This is Zoph, and you are watching Simply SCAdian, no title required. My co-host Luke is out tonight. He had something come up at the high school that he works at. And just a reminder, we're always looking for guests. We have a form that we've pinned on our Facebook page. So if you have any recommendations of people, just remember this show is about not peers. People who are not barons, people who have not been royalty or not current royalty. Those are the people that we want to have as our guests. Please feel free to recommend them to us. You can always reach out to me personally as well on Facebook and let us know if people that you think would be great guests for us. We are looking for guests outside of the kingdom of the Mid-Realm and the East because that's where most of our guests tend to be from. So if you have people in Anstiora or Adenveld, Kaid, let's talk. Let's make it work. Speaking of guests, how's that for a nice segue? Our guest tonight is Raphael di Merisi. He is a fencer primarily focused on the Italian rapier tradition as well as Bolognese side sword and long sword. He is currently serving as both the Society A&S Deputy for Historic Combat and the head of the Mid-Realm Reduced Armor Experiment. Before that, he spent years as the head of the Mid-Realm C&T Thrust Grappling Experiment. I can't wait to dive into all this. He is currently focused on coaching any and all who express interest in the art of swordplay and is currently in the process of writing his first book, A Modern How-To for 16th Century Italian Longsword. As well, Raphael is currently on vigil for the Order of Defense and is going to be elevated at a grand day of tournaments next week on the 28th of October. And like I was saying before we went live, oh my goodness, you're the closest appearance we've ever had for a guest. Welcome, Raphael.
Thanks. So for everyone watching, this was on the books before I got put on vigil.
Yeah, yeah, it was. So we'll dive into that first. So the first question we ask everybody, how did you find the SCA?
Yeah. I went to a high school where I didn't really know anyone. Most people from my middle school didn't go to that school. And so I found some new friends. And a few of them had somehow stumbled across the local practice. So the practice at the time, it was both fencing and armored. And it was in the field house of my high school. So I kind of followed I wasn't super listening to my friends for a little bit. I was like, oh, that sounds whatever. I've fenced before. I don't know if that sounds great. I kind of showed up March freshman year of high school, and then I never left. So that practice is still the one I'm at every week. That's the household I'm a part of. I've been to multiple weddings in that group, and here I am.
So was fencing the first thing that attracted you?
Yeah. I had done a small bit of foil fencing before that. I'd done a bunch of karate. I like swords.
I think that's like a mandatory requirement to be in the SCA. You must like swords and daggers.
Yeah, I just think they're fun.
Um, well, so I have questions about things that you put in your bio. So let's dive in. Oh, wait, first I want to ask, do you have an art that you do besides fencing? Do you have anything else that you do besides?
I do a little bit of poetry. Mostly I do a lot of the academic side of swords as opposed to just the competitive side of swords.
Talk to me about that. What do you mean by the academic side?
Yeah, a lot of the swordplay that we do comes out of the period we have. So particularly once the printing press gets a little bigger in Europe, so that's starting the late 15th century, we get an explosion of how-to manuals for fencing. So you have this rise of the middle class happening at the same time. So you have the German burghers, which the French eventually borrowed that word for bourgeoisie. Right, you have this merchant class that doesn't super fit into the feudal system, who have access to funds. Right, fencing is a thing that a gentleman would do, but right, if I just pay a fencing instructor, they'll teach me, even if I'm not of noble rank. So we have all these 600-year-old books of how to do it. So I've spent a lot of time with these books, primarily in translation. I did get a chance, so I'm in Chicago, Bear Navy Ayrton. So we have the Newberry Library, which is this cool private library. And I got to handle a bunch of the originals in person. Like you just go on their website, you go, okay, these ones, and they bring it to the table you're sitting at. And then you get to flip through a Thibaut, which is like this big and like looks like it's in 3D. It's gorgeous. So yeah, I've spent a lot of time with, and there's, you know, like any art, there's subsets, right? I know people who do 16th century German. I know people who are into like 17th century French stuff. So my stuff is mostly 16th century Italian. So there's the Bolognese masters. So Bologna is a city kind of like near Rome. So you have a lot of fencing masters publishing around there in like 1530s to 1570s. And then I also do a lot of rapier fencing. So I'm looking at like Venice and Padua for like things published like 1604 to 1610.
What is it about that time period that drew you?
Yeah, a few different things. I mean, definitely like there's the easy connection of, you know, Renaissance equals Italy. A lot of it though was just like who was around me, right? Like, so my local practice, the two really defining figures are Terry and Logos. So they're both really dedicated to these specific kinds of arts, right? These are also the translations that were available when I was starting out. You can see the connection between that kind of rapier fencing and modern Olympic fencing, where something like longsword looks a little bit more different. So it wasn't that hard for me to transition. So it wasn't hard for me to transition in. And that's what my teachers were teaching, was most of it.
And did you take fencing before the SCA? Have you had formal fencing lessons like Olympic fencing?
Yeah, so I did like a year and a half of foil as a kid, and then a little bit more in college. But I've also like gotten formal training in both like rapier and longsword since I've started in the SCA.
So let's start at the beginning, which is a very good place to start.
Sure.
Tell me about the different types of swords.
So there's lots of different kinds of swords, and we care about it a lot more than they did back then. So now we have rapier, and we have side sword, and we have saber, and we have all these typologies of swords. In Italy, they just said spada. Right, it's just sword. Occasionally, they'll say spada due mani, sword in two hands, which sometimes is the same sword. You're just using it differently. But in the same way, right? It's like I have my phone here. I don't say like my smart cellular phone. That's like weird. But if you're doing like a historical typology of phones, right? You want to say, well, there's a rotary phone, and there's an Android, and there's like a razor, and right, there's clearly different kinds. But as it's like the thing of the day, right? I just call it my phone. So in the same way, the sword of the day was just called sword.
So what is the difference between the swords as a fencer? Like,
Yeah.
what do you prefer? You said rapier and longsword, but what are those two? And you mentioned somebody who's into German stuff, so what kind do they use? Like, what is the difference
Yeah.
for the fencers to use them?
So yeah, it's one part the tool, it's one part the way you use it. So lots of times the tools will be made in any one place, and then people will use that tool differently depending on where they live, even if it's the same tool. So a rapier is a like later period sword, right? Very long, thin blade. So my like tournament sword has a 42-inch blade. My melee one has a 45-inch blade. And they didn't have the metallurgy to do that previously, as well as there's generally a complex hilt, right? A bunch of stuff around your hand. This is a like 15th century German messer. So not a lot of stuff around here. It's not very long. It's also defined, right? So it's a full tang, the same way like your kitchen knives are. Whereas like this part is built differently for other kinds of swords. And then longsword is a largely modern term, but mostly just, hey, you got two hands on this big sword. There tends not to be a lot of furniture on it, but mostly I'm here as opposed to here.
Okay. So let me go back to your bio. So you talk about so you talked about the Bolognese side sword, right? You primarily focused on the Italian rapier tradition as well as Bolognese side sword and long sword. So both of those sword types we know of coming from Bologna in Italy.
So they didn't originate there. The stuff that's coming from there are the authors talking about how to use it. So a side sword it's generally shorter than a rapier. Sometimes it has more or less furniture on the hand. My side sword's like in my case over there. It's a broad category of kind of sword, right? It's not just this one kind of hilt that does this one thing. But generally there's at least like a fingering or something more than just the straight crossbar. My side sword blade is 36 inches, whereas my rapier blade is 42 inches.
Okay. So moving on, the grilling by Zof shall continue. So what does the Society ANS Deputy for Historic Combat mean? What
Yeah.
do you do in that role?
So mostly I talk to my kingdom deputies and I see what they're doing. And then I go, yeah, good job. And then I give them resources. So I have a deputy in Atlantia, and I have one in the east, and I have one in the mid realm. And I have one in Drachenwald, and I have one in Callantir, and there's several others who I can't think of the top of my head. So they're doing most of them. But I kind of check in with them, right? I provide resources. We have a public Facebook page. Look at like Society Marshal ANS Deputy, I believe is what it's under Historic Combat. A lot of it's also like, hey, how do I get educational resources into people's hands? So the nice thing about this, right? It's not historic rapier fencing; it's historic combat. So if you have trebuchets and thrown weapons and archery and armored and so my goal is, at the end of the day, we are a 501c3 educational nonprofit. My thing is the educational part of that sentence. So hey, how do I throw in a little bit more historical education? So we did a melee a bit ago where it was like a Venetian themed event. And I asked one of my friends who's a better historian than I am, hey, what are some good Venetian battles? He's like, there's this one great battle where they're getting besieged by Landsknechts and they have these landmines. The Landsknechts, like the guy who hired them, is running out of money, so they're on a timer. And we didn't change the martial rules for the melee, but we're able to add more history to it, as well, as more translations come out. I want to spread the information about those. We just have like a really big Spanish translation come out. There's also stuff going on, Count Seto, for instance, in the Mid-Realm, is really involved with the historic African martial arts community. So whenever I see resources, whether it's sparring safe swords or videos or books on that, I want to share that information around. I know people who do period Chinese archery, which is like really different from English longbow. How different is it? Let me direct you to that person.
We could talk about Hungarian archery, which is very different too, though.
Sure.
But that's just my geek thing. So what led you down this path of exploring historical combat in the SCA?
I like swords. So here's the thing. There are lots of ways to use a sword. People in period figured out several of them. I don't think they have every answer. That said, the way I look at it is, hey, I could take these problems and I can try and figure out an answer on my own and work really hard and hit my head against this wall. Or I could look in the back of the book and find out where all the answers are and go, oh, look, thousands of people died figuring this out. Let's trust them a little bit and see what happens. And so I know a lot of people who are like, we have this idea of like, there's the athlete and there's the academic. And I know a lot of people who are really hardcore fencing academics who go win a tournament every month. So like, it works. It won't break your body. And it's historical, And I've been a history nerd since as long as I can remember. I used to watch the History Channel before that, kind of went down the drain.
Aliens.
So yeah, I love learning. I like swords. It's a great community.
So, do you speak and read Italian?
No.
So, how has the process been of translating all these? What have you done?
Yeah, so I'm not the translator. I have people who are. So like my friend Stephen Fraudis translated one of the Bolognese manuscripts. I know a lot of Italian vocab words. I don't speak or read Italian. A lot of it, though, is saying like, all right, cool. So I have this English translation, but right, this is written for a different audience than what we have now. Right, like 21st century people have different cultural reference points. So, for instance, a lot of the 15th century German material uses hunting metaphors, right? In the same way that we nowadays will use baseball metaphors for things. We're like, oh yeah, like that was a home run. But if you've never played baseball in your life or seen a baseball game or knew anyone who played baseball, and I say that, it won't make any sense. So it's like, all right, cool. So they talk about winding. What do they mean by winding with this? Oh, they're talking about you have a dog on a leash and you're winding up that leash and unwinding that leash. But you have to go do the first book won't tell you that's what they're doing. They're just like, well, here's this metaphor that everyone understands. Why would I explain it? So a lot of it is taking the translated word and then figuring out how to communicate that to a modern audience.
So you have a Laurel that you're apprenticed to.
Yep.
What brought that into being? How did that relationship start?
Yeah, so a few different things. So Katrin is actually my second Laurel. My first Laurel retired from the SCA, and my maestro Terry was like, "All right, we need someone in there talking for you," because so I I have political cunning in me. I don't like using it in the SCA. I thought about being a DC lobbyist for a while.
Really?
Yeah, and like I've worked on like political campaigns, and I liked people in the SCA too much to do that. But occasionally that means, hey, you should probably get some help in that area and have people talk for you and be like, that sure is a cool project you're working on that no one knows about.
Right.
Plus, Katrin is just great. Like this warm, welcoming person, really supportive. She also right. She's the newest mod in the kingdom, so she also knows her stuff with the sword. Although that's not what she got her laurel in.
No, she got her Laurel in costuming, right? Or was it embroidery?
Yeah, like general 14th century. But yeah, the other day someone mentioned this like one doublet by like number. And she's like, oh yeah, it's from this one archaeological dig. And then like we talked for an hour.
So okay, so I guess what I'm trying to find out is what is it about a relationship with a Laurel that you guys talk about? Because your art, I guess, is research.
So it's research, it's doing it, right? So I put out, so for instance, one of my main books is by this guy, Nicoletto Gigante, this Venetian fencing master. And me and my friend Alessandro shot a video of his entire book. So it's not only me sitting here reading books and being like, oh, isn't that interesting, right? It's like, all right, so what is my right? In the same way, if you're a cooking person, right, the period cookbooks leave a lot of things out. And you got to go do some work to figure out what's going on. And then you go, hey, here's my dish. So we did that, but with swords.
Is that video out there anywhere? Can I go to your video?
I will, let me hand it off to you. Yeah, it's on, so I have a YouTube channel. People have done like parts of it before from this book, but I was the first person to my knowledge, to publicly put out a video of the whole book. There is a second book. I will get to that video at some point. So, but yeah, I put out video content and I write articles, and I'm writing a book right now.
Yeah, so let's talk about it. I was excited to talk about this. Let me copy the link. And so tell me about your book.
Yeah. So there's lots of different kinds of swords and lots of ways of doing those swords. I'd say right now, the two most common swords, both in the SCA and HEMA world, are rapiers and longswords. Right, longswords, right, big two-handed things. There's a few different ways of using those that we have. Right now, if someone says, hey, I do longsword, like 85% chance they're doing one of the German books. 10% chance they're doing Fiore, who's an Italian author writing around 1400. The other 5% is literally anything else. So I studied some of the anything else. And I was like, hey, we have translations of books, great. We have modern how-tos for other sources. No one has written a modern how-to for longsword from this tradition. So the Bolognese tradition, right, even in the same book, it'll have, I have a sword and a cloak and you're on horseback, or we're fighting with pole arms. So longsword is a tool in the tradition. It's not the whole thing, but it's one of the more popular tools these days. So I currently have the second draft of a book. I'm hoping to publish it within the next like 6 to 8 months. Talking to someone who like gave me a deadline. Like, well, this is when I published my first book, so now I have to try and beat that. So yeah, I'm trying to figure out the publishing process. The first draft was pretty easy because I've been doing this at practice for years and years and years, and then I just wrote that all down. But now I have to like edit the book, and I have to publicize the book, and I have to figure out how to get a book printed, and I have to talk to the photographer. So there's a lot of steps, but I'm excited. I do also have a newsletter where I talk about that book and then other like sword related projects I'm currently in the middle of. So I'm going to send you the link to that. So if people are interested, feel free to sign up for my newsletter. As well, at the upcoming Royal University of the Mid-Rum in November here in Ayrton, I'll be doing a class talking about like the tenets of Bolognese longsword.
So are you self-publishing or do you have a publisher that you're working with?
The plan right now is to self-publish. I know a few folks who have written similar books in the sword world, and most of them self-publish at the moment.
So I have I'm really pinballing around with you, and I'm sorry because so wait, first I have to tell you my history, right? So when I joined the SCA 30 years ago, one of the first things I did was become the minister of the lists, and in the East Kingdom, that's actually an officer.
Okay.
And so I was the MOL for the Shire of Care Adamant, which is the state of Delaware. And
Gotcha.
I ended up learning how to run lists by the fencers. All the East Kingdom fencers taught me how to run lists. And so we would show up at events and we would go find our corner of the woods, sometimes literally, and go play. And I would run the lists and everybody would have a good time. And I didn't get my AOA until I got roped into running an armored list. Then all of a sudden I existed and I was like, okay, thanks for the AOA, can I go back to playing with my rapier buddies? But so that's my history. Like I've known and encouraged and loved rapier for 28 years in the SCA and have been so proud to see the strides that the rapier community has made from the formation of the MOD, especially. Like I just think it's so incredible. But when you study, so there's the history, but now, so when you study rapier and you study these books, what were they doing? Were they dueling in the streets? Are we like Romeo and Julieting here? Like, what were they doing with these swords?
Yeah.
Besides battles.
So the answer is everything. So in the same way, if you take a martial arts class now, is it a sport? Is it self-defense? Right? Is it a fight for when you're at the bar? Right? Like these same conversations happen these days they did back then, right? So you have dueling. So I wrote my college thesis on Italian dueling, which is for the upper classes a very formalized affair. So especially in the 16th century, right? Like you get into a dispute and then you have 40 days to go train and also cool off. There's a lot of cooling off, right? And remember, like medicine was terrible back then. They could do amputations, but like if I hit you in the chest cavity with a thrust, it's very bad. So the risks were really high. But we like to draw these like really clear lines these days. Like, okay, well, this is a dueling art, and this is street self-defense, and this is a battlefield art. And they were not non-interested, but they were less interested in that. So you see like Marozzo, who's one of the Bolognese authors. Almost all the stuff he's teaching you to do is fighting one-on-one, largely against someone who has the same tool as you do, right? So largely fencing the celle, fencing in the school. But he also talks about his teacher, Antonio Di Luca. He says, from Di Luca's head sprouted more fighters than from the Trojan horse, right? And there's also like, so he's writing the 1530s, and the Italian Wars just wrapped up, what, like 10, 20 years earlier. He's best friends with Guido Rangoni, who is one of the most famous condottieri, who both got into duels as well as led men into battle. And he's, using the same sword to do both of them.
So why? I don't know. I'm trying to think of a question that's witty and amazing, but it really comes down to why swords now?
Yeah. Swords are cool.
Okay, that's
so
a
the
good
now
idea.
part
Right.
is secondary. Yeah. Swords are always cool. I realize we're a bunch of nerds here, but for us, swords are cool. The other thing, so I've spent a lot of time in martial arts classes, both in and outside of the SCA. And the nice thing about swords is I don't have to really worry about it, right? If I teach you how to throw someone over your shoulder into the concrete, and I don't know you, and you seem a little sketchy, right? Like that person might go out and like actually hurt people. If I teach you how to hit someone with a sword, I'm essentially unconcerned about you doing anything too stupid. Like, yeah, you can do something stupid like on the list field and like hurt somebody, but it's not the same degree. So I have this nice freedom, right? I don't have to worry about the moral consequences as much of teaching swordplay that I would for an unarmed martial art or a modern armed martial art. So it lets us breathe more, right? It gives us this space that's a little farther removed, right? Like I'm not super interested in like training people to go out and like kill other humans. Like not an endeavor I'm in favor of. But fake killing other humans, hilarious.
Nice. Okay. All right. So what is the mid-round reduced armor experiment?
Yeah. So there's been a few things we're interested in running reduced armor. The rule set we're using now started in the East Kingdom, but essentially, so I've been to what, like 7, 8 Pensics, and in that time, I have never seen like the tip of a sword puncture a human and cause an issue. What I have seen are people getting carted off the field due to heat injuries. It's only getting hotter outside, and we are wearing the clothing from the Little Ice Age. Right, if you have a real, right, full-length wool doublet with an undershirt, and right, multi-layer paint slops and leggings under that, right, leather shoes, and you have leather gloves on, then you have a helmet on it, it gets really warm in there. So for years with these ideas like puncture-resistant armor, right, like a modern fencing jacket or this many layers of stuff, right, means that like if I get hit in the chest and something goes wrong, it's not going to hurt me. The rules we had were built around when we fought with epes, which break sharp, right? When the blade breaks, right, it goes like this. The blades we're using now, we're no longer using epee blades. So rapier blades are generally like vaguely diagonal, like diamond shape. I'm doing a table job showing it, but like it's mostly flat, but it comes together here and then in the middle. An epee blade is a triangle. So the blades we have now, much more so, if they break flat, right? So you're just, right, you're running into all of this as opposed to like a narrower profile. Right. So like the risk of puncture has gone down a lot as things have gotten hotter. So with reduced armor, you have 3 things you can reduce, pick 2 of them at a time. So you can move the back of your head, from what we call puncture resistant to abrasion resistant. I do a lot of cut and thrust, so I just keep it hard back in my head there and don't worry about it. You can move your torso from puncture resistant to abrasion resistant. So I show up to practice in a t-shirt, right? Like I'll put on like a linen shirt at events, but at practice I'm in t-shirt and shorts. And then I can take my limbs and taking from abrasion resistant, like one layer cloth, I can just have exposed limbs. And I've had people emailing me, be like, "Ah, cool! I haven't fought at that event in 10 years. Right? It's in July. It's always too hot. I got to do it, right?" Or like, people. Sometimes I'll get reports of people still getting heat injuries with reduced armor, which you can only imagine how bad it would be without it. As well, right? The cost to play in the SCA has gone up over the decades. And if you're trying to fence, right, it's too hot. The answer a lot of people use is butcher's mail, right? There's like thin stained mail, mostly from the same company. That's like $300. It works. It's the same stuff. So butchers use it. So right, they'll have like a glove. So if they're like chopping things and they slip, it won't cut off their finger.
Yeah.
It's the same kind of. This isn't the thick mail you'll see like on armored fighters. This is much thinner. Bouncers will also use these shirts, so if they get stabbed, it doesn't kill them. It doesn't reduce the impact, like it'll still hurt, but it means that you won't get punctured. But it's an expensive shirt, right? Someone has to like hand weld a bunch of little tiny rings together or rivet it. And like asking new people to be like, all right, cool, so you either have to wear wool or, and like, a wool doublet on the low end is what, like 150, right? It's a lot of money. Plus there's the sword and there's all, right? And like, all right, hey, you gotta have a shirt. Please show up with clothes on. It's a lot easier for people to do. So the goal is reduce heat injuries, make it easier for people to get into it, let people fight longer.
Nice. Yeah, I had to give up fencing because I can't wear all those layers. It's just too hot. And I was like, definitely not a Penzic. Oh, all right. So speaking of Penzic, so I was at Gulf Wars many years ago, and it was the first time. I'm always busy at Penzic. It doesn't matter why, but I am, and so I don't get to go out onto the battlefield really at all throughout all of Penzic. And I happened to catch a fencing melee. And everybody was just in these two long lines facing off each other, fighting one-on-one. And I was like, I know that's not period. I know that's not how they did it back then. Why are we doing it like that? So you're rolling your eyes, so I see that you sort of get what I'm saying. Is that still the way fencing melees are done?
It's the way some melees end up happening. So I think a lot of it is the scenario. So I'm on command staff as well for fencing. So I was like the regional commander and moving up. Anyhow, so you'll see that especially for the long resurrection battles, right? If I'm trying to take this flag and I get killed and I walk back and I tap my sword on the hay bale and I walk back, right? We're gonna fight over 10 feet. Every once in a while there'll be a push or something, but right, I can't physically burst through a line because I'm not wearing armor. And then also, right, on the armored side, the rattan is the cheap part, right? Like the helmet is the really expensive. For us, right, the sword is the expensive part, right? A new rapier blade is what, like 170, 180 bucks. And if you shove your ribs into it, it might break. I don't want that to happen. Right, or if someone steps on it, right, so it's easier to break. We're not wearing armor, so I can't just physically shove myself through the line. That said, so we had the field battle, where it's like we do it 5 times, you get 1 life, go. That one moves around, right, because I'm not just fighting over this. My goal is just kill all of them, right? So I get behind people and I can push through lines. I can take this person out. Or the last one we did at Penzic was this advancing flag scenario. You have to get this flag, and then the next one, and then the next one, and the next one, as opposed to like here are 5, and they're just sitting there. And that one also, like I started at one end of the field and I ended at the other end of the field. So I think that we do see dynamic fighting happening in fencing melees, but it's like the rules will always dictate the game.
So I guess because what I'm imagining is that in reality, back then, back in period, for the most part, sword use would have been a blend of rapier and armored fighting. In a
Yeah.
battle scenario, they wouldn't have been, unless you're talking about like a street fight, which we read about in, fantasy novels. But for the most part, wouldn't have been more battle scenarios and then one-on-one for rapier?
So at the end of the day, a sword is a sidearm. Right? It's your pistol. So like, a modern officer walks into battle with a pistol. That's not what they mostly use for fighting. Mostly, right, it's a backup weapon. You'll have specific kinds of units, like the Spanish had tercios. They had like a big, like rotella, like a big circular one, and then like a rapier. And people brought rapiers into battle as a backup. But, right, generally they're either like on horse, and that gives them some advantages, or they have a 15-foot pike they hit people with really far away, or they're shooting at you. So the idea of most people are going to show up with rapiers to a battle as a primary weapon didn't really happen.
Okay.
But at the same time, rapiers were on the battlefield. And now that we're starting to see spears happen on the fencing list, we're starting to get a little bit more of that historicity. So like at Pennsic, there was not for a war point, but we did a pike and shot square, right? So we had the rubber band guns, and then we had spears. And like that was like during the 30 Years' War, that's what most of the battles were fought with, was pike and shot.
That's absolutely fascinating. Okay. What exactly is cut and thrust?
Yeah. So as the name suggests, I get to cut and I get to thrust people. So in these standard fencing conventions, I can win by a thrust, or I can win by a draw cut, right? I can place a sword on a thing and then I can pull. Cut and thrust means I can go like that. It's really the biggest thing, right? I can throw a percussive cut at a person. Lots of people will have their own opinions on this. I'm just going to share mine. I'm very happy to play on both of those rule sets. There's certain tools that I think lend themselves better to one versus the other, right? This is a messer. It just happens to be the closest thing. I'm not a huge messer person, right? It's not optimized to poke people from really far away. It is a thick, choppy sword. It wants to cut. If someone asks me, hey, let's fight messer, I'm going to check to see that we're doing it cut. See also longsword or saber or anything like that. Right, because a rapier is primarily a long, thin thrusting weapon that can also cut. To me, it makes a little less of a difference. But again, right, this line is a thing the SCA invented because of our rule sets. Way back then, they hit people with all parts of the sword, including the pommel.
Really?
Oh yeah, they were really mean. And like even in friendly matches, so they didn't know what concussions were. So one of the German Fecht school, so fight school is school. So one of the German like fighting school conventions for their non-lethal play was fencing to the balloon. So we fenced at each other until one of us bled from the skull. And they did that with the blunt swords.
Wow.
Or the Italians have what they call the mostaccio, which is they take a shield and they punch you in the mustache. And they're doing that in tournament combat without masks on.
So the rate of, okay, that's wow. All right, so that's pretty violent.
Yeah, it was pretty violent.
I don't like this.
So I only know one guy like this now, but it was pretty common for fencing masters to only have one eyeball.
Is that like the Heidelberg scar?
That one was intentional. This one just kind of happens.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah. They still function in society, and you'll see So there's like a German longsword fencing convention where they're only hitting each other in the hands with the flat of the sword as opposed to the edge because they're craftspeople and they can't break their hands. So there's like some recognition that injuries are real. And then of course you have people saying this isn't hardcore enough. Right. In the same way you have like people who don't find SCA hitting to be hardcore enough, in the same way that the Spartans wouldn't wrestle in the original Olympics because they didn't allow eye gouging. It's the same conversation.
Okay. So we have 20 minutes left, and I want to dive in deep into being put on vigil.
Yeah, let's do it.
So how did it happen?
They got me real good. So I was kind of waffling on being on Champs team this year. I was like, well, maybe I'll just see if they pick me. I don't know if I need to submit my name. For anyone who hasn't been on it, like it's a lot of stress, right? You wait around a while and then you get one fight. And Terry, my maestro, was like, you should go submit. All right, that's fine. Didn't really think too much of it. Put my name in. They kind of asked me who I wanted to fight with. Give them a short list. So the day before, they tell me it's this guy, Bobby Tights. He's a master of defense out of the East Kingdom. Super nice guy. I had the idea for a bit so we have the grappling experiment running here in the Mid Realm and also in the East Kingdom, and I knew that Bobby was part of this, and I was like, I want to demo grappling in Champ. Right, it's the biggest stage for fencing. I was like, all right, let's put this in front of everyone. Let's have a good time. So I talked to him about it that night. He's like, let me sleep on it. I'll think it over. And then we ended up rendezvousing like the day of. We talked it out. Initially, it was like, do we want to just like throw a cut and then just go into the grapple? Like, no, let's just do it more naturally. We'd originally thought about doing it with long swords, we wear gauntlets, and like those are annoying to grab. So we just did single rapier. We do the fight. I throw a shot at his hand. My whole goal is just don't get stabbed in the face. So I throw a shot at his hand, it misses. I throw a second shot, it gets him in the hand. He switches hands. He runs in. My whole thought process was I just took my other hand and I shoved it into his hilt. He got behind me somehow, so I'm trying to like throw cuts at his head while he's behind me. Eventually he gets out and I cut him in the leg, and then we reset where he's legged. I kind of move a little bit, and then we both go, and he throws a light cut to my calf, and I hit him right on the head. So that was the prologue. So that happens. I think I'm fight 13 out of 20. So I spent a while sitting around. My partner was there with me, right? Fights are ending. I'm like, I'm pretty thirsty. I'm gonna go refill up. No. Oh, okay, that's weird. And there's a field court. I knew there was going to be a field court after Champs. There generally is. So Sir Ustad he won his cut thrust fight, and they gave him a Cavendish knot, right? Our AOA for fencing. Great. I don't know the guy super well, but he had a good fight. Super happy for him. And then my friend Gwen gets up, right? And I knew that Terry, my maestro, couldn't make it out to Penzance that year. And I was like, okay, well, I'm safe. We'll be fine. Both of our names have actually been on the list for court at Simple Day, our big pre-Penzance event, where I got my Evergreen, right? Like my ANS GOA. But okay, well, if it wasn't that, I don't know. My friend Gwen gets up there and starts reading a letter. And it hits me. And I start crying.
Aww.
It's slightly drizzling. My friend's got me real good.
So what does it mean to you to be a master of defense?
Immediately, it means a lot less stress. I'm sure I'm going to change that soon. But I've been, I got my bronze ring 7 years ago. It's been in my sights ever since then. I've had not this Penzance before. Every conversation I had with someone out of Kingdom was them asking, "Hey, why aren't you a master of defense yet?"
Oh my gosh, I hate it when people ask that question.
Right? Yeah, it's not great because you're asking the wrong person. I was like, I don't know, ask them. And I get to stop having those now, so that's nice. And now I've been recognized as, you are this thing that you've been working really hard for. And I'm really excited about where I was setting myself some really unhealthy standards of around my performance, how well I had to do in tournament combat. And I've fun tournaments since then. I was actually just at a human tournament this last weekend. I still have I've done well, but I'm a lot less worried about going, oh, I won that thing.
Right. Right.
I just got to fight, and it hasn't made a huge difference at my local practice because they've known me forever. But I know when I got the last one, I showed up to a teaching event and I was like, all right, cool, I'm going to teach these classes. And my attendance compared to the year before doubled, right? Because if you don't know who this person is and you see whatever thing before their name, see Maestro or whatever the thing is, as opposed to person's name, you go, okay, well, it's shorthand. I'm like, all right, well, I think they probably know what they're talking about. Let's go take their thing. So, I've my microphone is plugged into a louder amp now. Got to be careful with what I say, but I'm excited.
And your elevation is in a week and a half.
Yep.
Is Katrin making your elevation outfit?
Yeah, I'm very excited.
Shut up! No way, really?
Yeah, it's gonna look so good. Terry's he's made the belt hanger for me for my sword. So I've seen that. I haven't seen the sword yet. I'm excited. My friend Fergus is making the scroll. My friend Miguel is going all out for food. So I've been committed to this really stupid joke for years. So there's the buffet in the knighting and the national defense ceremony where they strike you across the face. It's the last blow unanswered. And I've had the really stupid joke in mind for years of, no, I had a buffet earlier. I don't know what you're talking about. So we're going to have a buffet. I'm really excited.
We're going to have a buffet. That's awesome. That's awesome.
Right? There's get hit across the face. There's feed people. And I know what my choice is.
Feed people. All right. So this has been awesome. I'm really happy for you, and I can't wait to hear more about your book when you get it out, and you better let me know.
Oh, well.
There's one last question that every guest gets asked, and I didn't prep you for this, so you're going to have to wing it. Sorry.
That's fine.
What can the SCA do better?
So there's a couple easy ones and there's some hard ones.
Lay them all on me. We have 12 minutes.
Great. So to start with, these two entirely non-political. Pretty much everyone, I hope, sort of out should be in support of this. Websites with accurate information and things starting on time. Right. This has so many implications. Right. I've been at events where there wasn't a tournament schedule published. Right. At this point, my calendar is fairly similar year to year. I've been doing this for 16 years. I know what events I want to go to. If you're anyone besides that, you're like, oh, I don't know about this one. Oh, that's a new event. And you're looking and it's a month out and it's 2 weeks out and there's no classes listed and there's no tournaments listed. And you're like, oh, well, why would I go to that? I'm gonna stay home. So just having accurate information in a timely fashion that's readable to the public, right? We have all these titles for things. No one outside of the SCA knows what a seneschal is. They don't know what an exchequer is. You can still have that there, parentheses, money person. Or you can have a website that people can read that has all the info as well, right? Try and run things on time. I realize it's not always the person running it who decides that, but if you have, right, you're talking about, you're busy at Penzik, you don't make it to the battlefield. Right, if I have more than one responsibility, which I often do, I have to choose, right? Whether it's if you have a child, or if you're trying to do ANS and combat, or if you're trying to do different kinds of combat. You're trying to see your friend get an award, or you do this, or you have to go cook for your camp, right? If I know when things are happening and they're, reliably within that window, I can plan ahead. That just started an hour, 10 minutes late. Now my day is messed up.
Right.
So start with those. Those ones, pretty non-controversial. More controversial, pick out all the racists. I swear to God.
Preach.
Do I know how to do that? Not as much, but like a code of conduct wouldn't hurt. But like to your, so for instance, right, like I do the fencing sources we have. The two biggest ones, right? We have stuff from Italy, we have stuff from Germany, right? The third biggest player is we have stuff from Spain. Guess who fits in the Venn diagram with people who enjoy history, who enjoy violence, and who enjoy really specifically Italian, German, and Spanish history?
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
Huh.
Yeah. So there's certain kinds, right? I have lots of friends who are interested in all of those things, and it's fine. And every once in a while, I find someone who's interested in those things, and it's not fine. And I would like those people to leave. And I would like us to strongly encourage them to leave.
Yeah.
I don't want to do the work of converting people. That's so much. There's just certain kinds of folks like, all right, is your ideology that this group deserves less? Go away.
Yeah.
Don't have time when I'm not getting paid. So yeah. Right. Or even like, so I had like a contract for a summer in Pennsylvania, and I found a local fencing school that had a lot of Spartan imagery. And I was like, oh, that's sketchy. I ended up running into one of their instructors somewhere else, and it was fine. But like, so I'm Jewish, and like, right, there's certain these things I have to really look for. Like, oh, they teach German fencing, and they sure like Spartan stuff. It's not always a good Venn diagram. This one ended up being fine, but I had to have someone else verify that for me for my own safety.
And it really sucks that it's 2023 and you still have to be that we still have to be concerned about those things.
Yeah, it's not great. So yeah, if we can make the SCA welcoming to certain people and not welcoming to other kind of people. So I was talking to someone a bit ago, and he's like, oh yeah, he's like, I'm not queer, but I make sure to like put a pride flag on all of my flyers, because not only does it say this is safe for certain kinds of people, it also says these kinds of people don't show up, go away.
Yeah.
Right. And like that kind of thing does a lot of that work. Right. He doesn't want to spend the time of like, fixing people. He's like, I have things to do. I would like to teach these kinds of folks. So yeah, that's the other one.
And I
so yeah,
suppose,
slightly more controversial, but
yeah. No, but it's accurate. And the nice thing now about becoming a peer, now here's this is my vigil talk that I give everybody who's on
right.
vigil. So you're gonna get it, and I'm sharing it with all of our viewers.
Yeah.
Peers are recognized, not made. So
Yeah.
when you have the doubts, just remember that they've seen you for who you really are, which is a chivalrous, honorable, good person.
Thank you.
All right, that being said, we're out of time. So, Raphael di Merisi, this has been really, really wonderful. Like 10 days out from you becoming a mod and ineligible to be on my show. And here we have you. Thank you so much. Best of luck to you.
Thank you.
And everyone else, we'll see you in 2 weeks.
Great.
All right.
Thanks for having me on.
There we go.